I'd like to call the meeting to order. Committee members just will take a bit of a roll call. So Margaret Bird, Steve Miller, Brian White, Doug Cook, Warden Marriott, Dave Bushy. Am I missing it? So Ian Beans will not be here. I do not see Mayor Romboats here either. Am I correct on that? But we do have quorum. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest, if any. None declared. We'll move into the Board of Health and hopefully have Dr. Ranaday here to give us an update, please. Thank you. Hello, Doctor. Good morning.
Good morning. I'll just confirm that you can hear me.
We can.
Okay, great. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. I don't have a substantial update from the last time that we spoke, but I'll just give you kind of an overview of things that are happening and a few little changes that are out on the horizon, both for us and then more broadly. So in terms of cases, our most recent report from today says that we received 7 cases yesterday. The report from the day before that was about 15 cases. And then over the last 4 days prior to that, I think there had been about 80 cases, which averages out to about 20 a day. So those are substantially lower numbers than we had been seeing a few weeks ago. And it's important to remember that we don't think that that accurately reflects the prevalence of disease that's out in the community, right? Largely because far fewer people are eligible for the PCR test that is reported to public health than there used to be. And so what we're seeing represents really a small fraction of the disease that we think is circulating in the community. With that, I think, comes a growing recognition that if the cases are not really an accurate picture of of the prevalence of disease, that there may be some changes that are necessitated in terms of how we report on those. And so we've looked around at what other health units, especially our neighbors, have been doing, and we've seen them decrease their frequency of reporting, move away from daily case reporting into a few times a week. And also, when you have fewer cases and you're not sure that those cases represent the true burden in the community, it becomes harder to disaggregate the cases the way we used to by type of exposure and so forth. And so we're going to need to suspend some of that disaggregation as well. You'll see some reports come out about exactly what we're proposing to do and when it will begin. I think it's going to start as early as next week to line up with what some of our other health units have already been doing for a few weeks now. And again, it's something that's contextual and something that can be revisited if the testing parameters change and more people are eligible to get tested, or if we think that there's another variant, or if we think that there's a substantial wave of disease that we need to report differently on. We can always revisit those parameters. The other thing to know is that, our case and contact management has also been streamlined to focus towards higher risk settings. And so those are long-term care homes, retirement homes, et cetera. And so even those parameters are going to start, we're expecting some ongoing streamlining from the ministry in terms of the guidance that they provide about how to manage cases and contacts, really, really focusing on high risk settings. And I don't mean settings in which there's a higher risk of exposure. What we really mean is settings that are a higher risk of severe burden of disease. And so that's why we're talking about long-term care homes, retirement homes, and certain group homes where people might be medically fragile. And so we'll see more of that. And as that guidance comes out, we will review it and then adapt our procedures accordingly. Remember that the broader context, and so it's important to just sort of point this out, that we have a globally largely unvaccinated population, right? So when you have a global population that's unvaccinated and you also have the potential for sort of animal reservoirs and things like that, you have these conditions where you're going to expect that there will be more variants, right? If one of those variants turns out to be incredibly severe, or if one of those variants turns out to significantly evade the protection against severe disease that is afforded by the vaccines, that would require a change in strategy again. But based on what we see now, and based on the Omicron variant being largely less severe, and especially we have a highly vaccinated population, those are good underpinnings for the way that things are moving forward now, right? Which is to treat this virus alongside of other respiratory viruses that are circulating in the community, and to then adjust the response. And so you're seeing that adjustment take place slowly in different places. And so from a policy perspective, you see it happening at the provincial level, pulling back on certain things, opening things up, having fewer capacity restrictions, and looking at revisiting the vaccine passport system that's been in place, right? And then at the federal level, you're looking at changes to the requirements that are in place for travelers and so forth. And those changes have also been announced. So I think that's part of a trend. And I think the thing that would throw that off balance would be the identification of a very severe variant and so forth. But otherwise, I can see this moving forward. And then finally, in terms of our vaccination efforts, we're dramatically it's a dramatically lower demand for vaccines. We continue to offer them, albeit not at the same frequency as we used to. And so, if you think about early in January, where there was a week there where we did 10 or 11,000 vaccines in the week, now we're more like down to 2,000 or so, right? So there are still people who might come in for their first doses, second doses, and we're offering that. We're offering booster doses to the eligible population, and we're still seeing some uptake. So we'll continue to offer that, and in various places across the county as well. On a pop-up sort of mobile basis. And then there's ongoing kind of work to figure out what kind of planning needs to be done for this fall and winter respiratory season, right? So that's an early discussion that's happening provincially and locally in terms of what do we think that's going to look like, and early discussions about sort of getting back some of the core public health work as well as core functions in other sectors, right? Being mindful of the fact that especially in public health, we may still need to be flexible to respond to waves and so forth of cases and outbreaks. And just another, I meant to go back and when I talk about cases, I usually talk about outbreaks as well. And so right now we have 3 institutional outbreaks. We've declared a number of outbreaks over. Recently, we had up to 19 at one point. And it's important to remember that the dynamics of these outbreaks in long-term care and retirement homes are very different than they used to be. And what I mean by that is that we are seeing some institutions where we have a high number of cases. But when you look broadly at the severity of those cases, it is much lower, right? And so although we have seen some fatalities in those institutions, and that is unfortunate, the number of fatalities is not anywhere near what there would have been with those kinds of numbers of infected people. And that is primarily due to vaccination of that population, right? So that's really important to remember. It has changed the dynamics of the burden of disease. It has changed how those outbreaks look in those places. And although there is still fatality, it's not to the same degree. And many of the symptomatic cases in those institutions can also easily be managed within the facility. So there's fewer hospitalizations and fewer cases of severe illness. So with that, I think I've covered the things that I had, maybe in a slightly different order than in this morning's meeting, but I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Doctor. I'll open the floor up for questions, if any. Councillor White, please.
Thank you, Chair Ferguson. Thank you, Dr. Renaday. This is more of a broad question, probably just requires a little bit more of a philosophical outlook. But in the conversation now that COVID-19 could be, barring any severe variants, could be moving towards being relegated in with other respiratory illnesses. And in theory, then we're moving past this state of emergency, this 2+ years of COVID emergency response. What should we, or what do you think will be the lessons that carry forward, and what possible culture shift do you think we would adopt in terms of treating respiratory illnesses. I think where I'm getting at is before, I think we all just used to brush it off, cough into our arm and show up for work anyway. Is that the sort of normalcy that we're looking at with COVID and other respiratory illnesses, or is our mindset going to change? Is public health's outlook on these illnesses going to change towards taking them all a little bit more seriously? Does that question make sense?
Kind of, yeah. I'm just not sure that there are clear answers right now, right? I mean, I think there needs to be a process by which you go back through the learnings and then you start integrating them into what you do going forward, right? And so there's active discussions. That's why I talked about, what does the fall season look like, right? So what are the kinds of lessons that we want to take with us into the general prevention of respiratory diseases? What, right? And in what settings would we use those interventions more routinely? So I think there are ongoing discussions about that. I don't think there's any decisions, but I think as we go forward, we would want to talk about some of these interventions as having effects on all respiratory diseases and whether or not they're worth doing in that context rather than just the context of COVID.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the floor? Seeing none, I'll thank you, Dr. Ranaday, and thank you for your time and your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move now into the long-term care division. Number 5, we'll go to 5. We'll do them one at a time. Corresponds to receive and file. I can move in a second to receive the Advantage Ontario report. Mr. Cook moves. Second by Mr. Bushy. Discussion. Go ahead, Mr. Cook.
So through you to Ms. Joris, is there any indication that this is going to have any impact on the budget? Will we be seeing any? I see there's quite a few recommendations that are coming out of this report. Is there any indication that the provincial government would be looking at this as in a positive way to be given more funding to get some of these recommendations in place?
Through you, Chair Ferguson, to Councillor Cook. This is advocacy that our association does every year before the budget. So I know that many of these issues have been discussed with the ministry throughout the pandemic, and there are announcements coming about redevelopment. So some of those recommendations I think will be taken into consideration. Rising costs of food and supplies, etc., will also need to be considered, I think, in the new fiscal year. So we'll see. They have asked for input from the associations, so hopefully they will consider some of these recommendations.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions? Mr. White, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I believe the motion was to receive and file, but I would suggest that we move to endorse this if that is substantially different than receiving and filing.
I'd have to ask if there would be that'd be an amendment to this. Am I correct? And that have a seconder for that?
Yes.
And I'd have to go back to the mover and seconder to approve the amendment.
I'm okay with it.
And Brian, you seconded it, did you? No, Mr. Bushy did. Would you'd be good with that? Thank you. I'll ask a question to endorse this. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Information report number 2, the COVID-19 update report. Can I have a mover and a seconder to bring this to the floor, please? Mr. Miller by Mr. White. Any questions or remarks? Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you, carried. Requiring a motion, we have our Adult Enrichment Center report. I have a mover and a seconder to bring this to the floor, please. Mr. White. Mr. Merritt had his hands up. Thank you. The recommendation is the Adult Enrichment Center Advisory Committee 2021 annual report be approved by County Council. So discussion, please. Mr. White.
Just want to say thank you to the committee for their work during the last couple of years. I know it's been very difficult, so I'm sure it's much appreciated in the community, but I want to extend my thanks as well.
Thank you. I noticed in the pictures on the report that I do see several people I recognize in the pictures in it. It's nice to see local people in there taking advantage of the program out of Brook Alvinston. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Move into the corporate services. Any other business before we move out of this? Seeing none from staff or from council, we'll move into the corporate service division. The first we have is the report for returning to in-person meetings. And again, this one is just for information, but I'll have a mover and a seconder to bring this to the floor, please. Mr. White and Mr. Miller. Discussion, please. Go ahead, Margaret Bird, please, Councillor.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, could you please just, from the report, it said that you're going to be providing to each of the members before meetings a screening tool link. Can you give some more details on exactly what that is?
There you go. Yes, thank you, Councillor Bird, through you, Chair Ferguson. The link in question is the same link that the employees are asked to complete by every day when they report to work, and it's the link that's provided as well through the Province of Ontario screening tool. So it's essentially just a quick screening tool to assess whether or not there are symptoms and any other factor related to COVID-19. And if there's a failure, we ask folks to work from home where they're able to do so, and if there's a pass, then of course they're more than welcome in the workplace.
So just to follow up, thank you. And so does that mean then that it's just an on-screen list of questions which we submit to you prior to the meeting?
That's correct. All of our employees go through that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Cook had his hands up.
Yeah, thank you. Through you to, I guess, to Mr. Thibault too. This is all subject to change prior to the provincial government. If they change their mandates and restrictions, obviously our restrictions would be changed also, right?
Yes, thank you again, Councillor Cook, again through Chair Ferguson. That's absolutely correct. In fact, between now and early April, I expect at least 2 sets of changes to those rules. We know that we have one set in effect or coming into effect tomorrow, but the first additional changes that we fully anticipate comes into effect March 1st, and we do anticipate further changes to the rules come March 14th. So what that means is that the return to work protocol, the return to council protocol may change, and if it changes, we'll definitely communicate that to all council members well in advance of those meetings to make sure that everyone is fully geared up for the meeting.
Thank you. Any further discussion, questions? All in favor to receive and file? Carried, thank you. Any other business while we're in this part? Seeing none, we'll move into the Finance, Facilities and Court Service Division. Again, this is an information report to receive and file. Can I have a mover and a seconder to bring us to the floor, please? Mr. White, Mr. Cook, discussion, please. Seeing none, I will call a question. All in favor? Carried, thank you. We're going to go to 7B, and this will deal with the reports requiring a motion. Annual year-end report on reserves and reserve funds report. A mover and a seconder, bring this to the floor, please. Mr. Miller, second by Mr. Marriott. The recommendation will be that the attached summary report on reserves and reserve funds and its recommendations be accepted as presented. Discussion, please. Mr. Cook.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Through to Mr. Parshow. I guess looking at the reserves and basing on what you just showed us in the budget, proposed budget going forward, is there a number, I guess, in your head or a ratio that you actually would be looking at to improve the overall results that we're getting right now? We're probably at and I would just going by quartiles, we're probably in the lower quartile of where other municipalities would be, or higher tiers would be compared to the reserve numbers. Is there a ratio that is out there that's fixed that would put us in a little better direction?
Through the chair, as far as the specific, sorry about that. Through the chair, as far as a specific number, value for reserve funds, it's very difficult to determine at this point in time because the county is going through an asset management plan exercise. If you have new assets where they're very new, you really don't require a whole lot of money in those capital reserve funds. So until we do a condition study on all the assets across the corporation, it's difficult to determine what that exact value is, and we hope to have a better picture of what that potential value is over the next year or so. I do know our reserve funds are low because we do have an infrastructure backlog. That's very, very clear, and it's important that over the next few years we start building some reserve funds in areas that we know we have very limited dollar value in. Specific reserve funds such as affordable housing, such as long-term care, such as our Bayside acquisition in 2031. So we're trying to build them up strategically, but to get a specific number on reserve funds at this point in time is just a bit premature.
So just to follow up then, so I know we could probably have change in council coming into 2022 or 2023. I guess direction-wise, I know would it be great to have a direction from council to make you sure you're going in the right direction with it. And I don't know how to reinforce that at this point. I like what you're doing with your asset management plan and your the reserve plan that you've got going. It would just be nice to make sure that council stays on point and doesn't get sidetracked by a lot of outside grant requests that come in that can take away from what we need to get done for keeping our reserves going. Just a comment.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any further questions, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Move into the tangible capital assets policy update report. Can a mover and a seconder bring this to the floor, please? Mr. White? Mr. Miller? The recommendation is that the County Council accept the amended tangible capital assets policy F0603 attached as Appendix A. Discussion, please. I'll start off a little bit. So I do appreciate, I think, going from $500 to the $5,000. The smaller amounts got to the point probably two owners for your bookwork. I think that's a good move. Any further discussion, Mr. Cook?
So yeah, similar question. Right now, if we go to 5,000, use an example of buying a dishwasher or whatever, the refrigerator for $1,500. If you bought 4 of those, would they be capitalized? Would they all be individually recorded as $1,500 a piece?
Through the chair, basically, it really depends on the program service area. In that, if you have an annual program of $1,000, $1,500 purchases, it may be a $15,000 item, and we'd be capitalizing it. If it's a one-of, for a particular program service area, we'd potentially be expensing it. What we're trying to do is basically modernize our financial policies in that there's a lot of municipalities, as far as the threshold is concerned, $500 is a very low value, and bringing it up to $5,000 is an amount that appears reasonable, and it reduces significant amount of workload as far as just capitalizing and depreciation of assets that are less than 5,000. So it really depends on the particular service area.
Okay.
Good. You have further questions, discussion, please? I will call the question. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Any other business? Thank you. We'll move on to 8, Social Services Division. We do now move into, and these are information reports, there'll be 3 of them. The 10-year capital asset management funding plan update report. Can I move in a second to bring this to the floor, please? Mr. White? Looking for a second, and Mr. Cook, thank you. Discussion, please. Any remarks, Ms. Colasanti? Or is this whose report is this? This is yours, correct?
You're right. These are just information reports. I don't have any additional information to provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I will call the question. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Move into the Housing Services Comparative Statistics Report. Can I have a mover and a seconder to bring that to the floor? Margaret Bird, followed by Steve Miller. Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Move into the Ontario Works Caseload Statistics Update Report. A mover and a seconder to bring us to the floor, please. Mr. Cook, by Margaret Bird. Discussion? I will call the question. All in favor? Carried, thank you. That's received and filed. Any other business?
I have no other business at this time. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Now move into the in-camera. So can I have a mover and a seconder to move this into camera? Margaret Bird moves, second by Brian White. All in favor? Carried, thank you. And we will now have the gifts. Rise and report, please, Mr. Tufo.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ferguson. For the members of the public, Committee PM met briefly in camera for approximately 7 minutes to discuss one item. That item that was discussed is the cyber incident that occurred last May of 2021. That's all I have to report, Chair Ferguson.
Good, thank you. We're now to adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Margaret Bird makes a motion. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Nice meeting. And
we'll make you the second.